thing I really wanted to end with was a satirical piece by Lewis that, I mean, just as they're interested in the tension between the kind of tacky elves and the, real elves that are medieval elves, sublime elves, or they're also interested in, what Christmas really is, and to what extent does the way that the Christmas that's generally celebrated in especially secular culture, to what extent does it overlap, intersect with actual like Christian Christmas, right? Celebrating the birth of Christ. This is a quick little satirical essay that Lewis wrote about the way Christmas is observed in Britain. He's pretending that it is a lost part of Herodotus's history, where Herodotus describes the weird customs of different people and different cultures. The island of Niaturb, which of course is Britain spelled backwards.
In the middle of winter, when fogs and rains most abound, the Niaturbians have a great festival which they call Xmas, and for 50 days they prepare for it in the fashion I shall describe. First of all, every citizen is obliged to send to each of his friends and relations a square piece of hard paper stamped with a picture, which in their speech is called an Xmas card. But the pictures represent birds sitting on branches, or trees with a dark green prickly leaf, or else men in such garments as the Niaturbians believed that their ancestors wore 200 years ago, riding in coaches such as their ancestors used, or houses with snow on their roofs. And the Niaturbians are unwilling to say what these pictures have to do with the festival, guarding, as I suppose, some sacred mystery. And because all men must send these cards, the marketplace is filled with a crowd of those buying them, so that there is great labor and weariness. But having bought as many as they suppose to be sufficient, they return to their houses and find there the like cards which others have sent to them. And when they find cards from anyone to whom they also have sent cards, they throw them away and give thanks to the gods that this labor at least is over for another year. But when they find cards from any to whom they have not sent, then they beat their breasts and wail and utter curses against the sender. And having sufficiently lamented their misfortune, they put on their boots again and go out into the fog and rain to buy a card for him also. And let this account suffice about Xmas cards. They also send gifts to one another, suffering the same things about the gifts as about the cards, or even worse. But during these 50 days, the poorest, oldest, and most miserable of the citizens put on false beards and red robes and walk about the marketplace, being disguised, in my opinion, as Kronos. And the sellers of gifts, no less than the purchasers, become pale and weary because of the crowds and the fog, so that any man who came into a Niaturbian city at this season would think some great public calamity had fallen on Niaturb. This 50 days of preparation is called, in their barbarian speech, the Xmas Rush. But when the day of the festival comes, then most of the citizens, being exhausted with the rush, lie in bed till noon. But in the evening they eat 5 times as much supper as on other days, and, crowning themselves with crowns of paper, they become intoxicated. And on the day after Xmas, they are very grave, being internally disordered by the supper and the drinking, and reckoning how much they have spent on gifts and on the wine. For wine is so dear among the Niaturbians that a man must swallow the worth of a talent before he is well intoxicated. Such then are their customs about the Xmas. But the few among the Niaturbians have also a festival, separate and to themselves, called Christmas, which is on the same day as Xmas. And those who keep Christmas, doing the opposite to the majority of the Niaturbians, rise early on that day with shining faces and go before sunrise to certain temples where they partake of a sacred feast. And in most of the temples they set out images of a fair woman with a newborn child on her knees, and certain animals and shepherds adoring the child. The reason of these images is given in a certain sacred story, which I know but do not repeat. But I myself conversed with a priest in one of these temples, and asked him why they kept Christmas on the same day as Xmas, for it appeared to me inconvenient. But the priest replied, "It is not lawful, O stranger, for us to change the date of Christmas, but would that Zeus would put it into the minds of the Niaturbians to keep Xmas at some other time, or not to keep it at all. For Xmas and the rush distract the minds even of the few from sacred things. And we indeed are glad that men should make merry at Christmas, but on Xmas there is no merriment left. And when I asked him why they endured the rush, he replied, "It is, O stranger, a racket," using, as I suppose, the words of some oracle and speaking unintelligible to me, for a racket is an instrument which the barbarians use in a game called tennis. But what Hecataeus says, that Xmas and Christmas are the same, is not credible. For first, the pictures which are stamped on the Xmas cards have nothing to do with the sacred story which the priests tell about Christmas. And secondly, the most part of the Nioterbians, not believing the religion of the few, nevertheless send the gifts and cards and participate in the rush and drink, wearing paper caps. But it is not likely that men, even being barbarians, should suffer so many and great things in honor of a god they do not believe in.
And here Lewis is pretty stark about, well, there's the way that secular culture celebrates Christmas, and there's the way that Christians celebrate Christmas. And I think in other places, without necessarily contradicting that, he does more highlight, like in the Visit from Father Christmas, for example, that it is a time to be joyful. That is part of the way. In Meditation on the Psalms, there's a chapter called The Fair Beauty of the Lord, and he talks about a Christmas poem an Easter poem that a child writes that starts with chocolate, eggs, and Jesus risen. And he's like, that's exactly what you want. Like that's a perfect poem because it recognizes both the spiritual dimension and the kind of material dimension.
Let me just take this opportunity to say that if you are also bothered, like C.S. Lewis and Charlie Brown, by the disjunction between Christmas and Xmas, you may want to check out the site my wife and I do. It's called 12tide.com. That's 12tide.com. We advocate fasting during Advent and celebrating all 12 days of Christmas from December 25th to Epiphany, January 6th, like they used to do back in olden times. This allows us to take a more meditative approach to the season and be a lot less stressed about buying everyone's gifts on time. Anyway, feel free to check it out. It's called 12tide.com. That's 12tide.com.